Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Lucky Brain Tumor Podcast. I'm Emily Truel, and I am delighted to have with me today Kim. Kim, thank you so much for joining me.
So happy to. And I don't know how I didn't realize the name of your podcast until this moment. And I'm like in love with it. Like, okay, yes, yes,
I
lucky.
like the name because it's both yes lucky but also not lucky, like it's sort of the double entendre of the name of being told you're lucky that you got this brain tumor if you're gonna have a brain tumor, but also
Right.
you don't feel lucky when you find out you have a rare brain tumor. You feel like you lost at odds, so sort of both.
It captures feelings for sure.
Yes, exactly, and
A
it's
lot of feelings it
memorable.
captures.
So to get us rolling, why don't you tell me a little bit about what it was like for you to get diagnosed for an acoustic neuroma? What did that look like?
It has been a journey. So if we start from the beginning, um, I was in my junior year of college. I think I was 21. Um, Newly married, and I just started to feel off and had a head cold. Thought that things were tied to that, kind of like stuffy ear, hearing loss, a lot of the usual symptoms, but feeling fatigue, feeling off balance, and just um, all the things. And also a little bit apprehensive to go to the doctor. I'd never had like a significant medical experience to that point. It wasn't really necessarily like part of my experience. And so it took me a little while to finally get to the doctor, to finally see an ENT and get an MRI. And so by the time that happened, it was a little bit of relief of like, okay, I'm not going crazy. All of these things that I've been experiencing are actually tied to something, and there's a solution and there's a remedy. So yes, all the feelings, but also a huge sense of relief of like, okay, there actually is something that's off. It's not just me. Let's handle it and get it taken care of. And my the tumor was 3.4 centimeters. So because of the size, I had very limited options, which was probably in hindsight a positive thing because my course forward was it was straightforward of how we were going to proceed with next steps and treatment. So it was highly recommended to me to proceed with the translab surgery. And so because of the size, because I was very symptomatic, when the neurosurgeon and the ENT could make it work in their schedule, that was my date. And I was going to college in a pretty small town in Idaho. And so it was also an interesting experience being in a place where the ENT had never seen this before, and then being referred to a larger city with more medical care and expertise. So we traveled a few hours away for the surgery, which happened in Salt Lake City, Utah. And um, surgery went well, I think as good as it can. It went. But in the days following, I had some complications and ultimately had a blood clot in the brain and was found because one of my vocal cords was paralyzed. And again, just kind of like these feelings of it's powerful to know your body because only you know when something is really not right. And that was ultimately how the blood clot was discovered. And then um, blood thinners led to a bleed and an emergency surgery at the initial surgery site. And then a few hours later, that circumstance repeated itself, but in a different area, followed by another surgery. So initially, three surgeries within a couple days, and a far longer than anticipated recovery, but nonetheless, I would say like a full recovery, other than um, the changes with balance, the changes with hearing loss, but um, ultimately, like getting back to life, getting back to college, graduating college, moving forward with things, and then At my 5-year check-in, they found an area that appeared to be regrowth. So we watched it for a little while. I was back on MRI rotations in higher frequency, and it progressed to grow. So ultimately, it was recommended that I do something. And then, lucky, had the opportunity to go through the journey later on in my life, um, when I had time to explore all the options. And again, like all of the options were on the table because the area was quite small, and went through a very different process in um, interviewing different people, exploring different ideas, ultimately choosing radiation. And that was just about 2.5 years ago. And we're starting to feel fine. I'm starting to feel fine. Actually, no, um, probably a year of just not quite right and recovering. And it's probably been a year and a half now that things have really felt better than ever and moving forward with optimism, and we'll see where it goes from here.
That
Very
is,
long answer, Emily, probably too long.
no, you're fine.
That's
I mean,
most of the data.
it's quite a journey of what you went through. And so that's okay to share the breadth of that. And I guess I would be curious, and I think people would find it useful to hear you sort of describe like the recovery period from surgery versus the recovery period from radiation because, they are wildly different. And of course, your particular situation was like very unique with how your multiple surgeries went and all of that. So that's going to be a little different, but still, it's useful to know. And I know a lot of times people are looking at both of those and wondering what they're going to be like. Or even if they've had surgery and they're looking at a regrowth situation like yours, hearing what radiation recovery is like, knowing what surgery recovery is like. So if you could just talk about those pieces a little bit more and what that was like for you, I think that'd be really useful.
What initially comes to my mind in response to that is the difference that was not obvious to me, but became apparent or might not be talked about. And it's that when recovering from surgery, the people around you see it. It's not common with the acoustic neuroma to like have like all the hair lost or the head shaved. But because of those follow-up surgeries, I ended up with like a half-shaved head and long hair on the other side. And ultimately, I went home and we just did the buzz cut for a little while. And so the buzz cut plus the big scar that was in the healing process, everyone around me could see that I had been through something. And so I felt more grace in both like my immediate, my family, my friends that actually knew what I had been through, and also my interactions with the general public. I felt like people knew that I was going through something and had been through something, and maybe were a little bit more patient with me or gave me a little more support and grace. Radiation was so different because I was so taken aback when I went into the radiation. They didn't even have me change into a hospital gown, Emily. And I was like, is
Wow.
this a big deal? Like, okay. So I was wearing my street clothes, and they have the radiation mask and like a few things that you put on to prepare yourself. And and then I had the radiation and kind of walked out like, what just happened? I don't know. And then I just kind of went back to my life, and some of the symptoms then, set in. And it was really about a year of symptoms for me, which I think is also a little bit longer than normal. Um, but I mean, even in the couple weeks following, it was like, of course, my husband knew that I had radiation. He took me there, but I felt like after a couple weeks, like maybe he kind of forgot. And I just felt like there was a pretty significant difference for me emotionally. And like they're both kind of similar circumstances where your body really goes through something and you have a significant healing ahead for you. But I almost felt like the recovery from radiation was more challenging. Maybe it wasn't more clinically challenging, but because the people around me kind of more or less like maintained expectations for me that were similar post radiation. even though it was quite a significant medical journey to go through. And I did not expect that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really hard. And I feel like that's a really great point on the whole discussion of invisible disability, or invisible illness, because with your first surgery, it was overt and people could really see that you needed help and they were reminded when they looked at you, versus the second
Uh-huh.
time, it was like completely hidden. And so often, I think we feel pressure to to cover it, to hide it when we need help. And sometimes making it overt so that you don't necessarily have to speak up that you need the help, but it's like obvious that you need the help is really empowering almost to get that assistance. I think that's really interesting. And expectations matter too, right? Like what you expected when you went in for brain surgery versus what you expected when you went in for your radiation. Would you say the fatigue was similar from both, or did it feel very different?
I think that the fatigue was different, present with both, but um, after my surgery, well, I remember, okay, a few years ago, Alex and I somehow got involved in volunteering a litter of, or I mean, in like babysitting a litter of puppies.
Mm.
And I remember like seeing the puppies, they would be like so excited, they'd be playing, and then they would almost kind of just like slump over, and then all of a sudden all the puppies would be sleeping. Like they had kind of that point of exerting energy and then they were like out. And that's kind of what I felt like after surgery, where I had like these stints of energy and then like there was no way I could even possibly keep my eyes open. It's like I was out. I only had a certain bandwidth of energy. And it was like that. I mean, I can't even remember for how long, but right after surgery and even when I was home, these periods of very small windows of energy and then I would just have to sleep. I also thought of like this is probably similar to like a baby that's awake for certain hours and then they just need to sleep so that all the development and growth can happen. And it's probably maybe similar after a brain surgery. Like there's so much repairing to happen. There's just like so much for the body to do. Um, so after radiation, certainly felt fatigued, but it was different, probably less, but maybe like more prolonged. I remember um, should have probably taken time off work, but I'm also a busybody, so I just kind of tinkered around. Um, but but for quite a long time, I mean, by 7 or 8 o'clock, I was like mentally useless, and it was best that I was like winding down by that time. And so it was like more energy, but maybe the fatigue was present for longer in a smaller degree. That might have just been a me problem because if I had rested more acutely, maybe the recovery would have been better. I don't know. But um, fatigue was a little different for me in both circumstances, although present in both of them.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel your pain on the whole not resting and then prolonging the fatigue. I am very often guilty of that myself, so I understand. That's a difficult balance. Um, I know you've had some issues in the past with things like headaches and those sorts of things. Did you feel like you had headaches after radiation as well?
The headaches after radiation were really tough. Yeah. Um, I've heard some say that the symptoms you have going into treatment are sometimes symptoms that you still have afterwards. And many of my symptoms like resolved with the treatment of the tumor, but headaches were one thing that has been a part of my journey kind of in its entirety. Um, so actually the headaches were probably worse after radiation. I had quite a lot of um like edema, swelling, like just the kind of your typical like post-radiation things. And the headaches were very tough, um, and lasted for quite a long time, really kind of like daily headaches that Some I could push through, some I couldn't. Most I could. Um, but I'm actually happy to report I can't remember the last time I had a headache. I can't remember the
Wow.
last time I took Advil for a headache. So I'm currently in what feels to be a magical season. I don't know if it will continue.
That's amazing
I hope that it
though.
will, but yeah. And I don't know what else to attribute it to other than just an effort of good health. All the boring things that we all do and know to do of diet and exercise and sleep and stress management. Um, so we'll see. We'll see if it holds out, but I'm hopeful
Yes.
that it's been part of the healing process and things have calmed down and balance is restored in like the head and skull area, hopefully.
Yes. That's amazing. I'm so happy for you because those headaches can be really debilitating and really hard to find the right tools to cope with them. So that's fantastic.
Absolutely. And um just not enough research or like knowledge of like what causes them. And there's so many triggers and so different for so many people. So, I mean, it's just like a continued effort of how do I fit into this? What, what seems to trigger headaches for me or what seems to work and just continuing that and leaning into it. Because yeah, that's a really tough one. And it makes sense that that would be a prominent symptom because, the skull is like a finite structure. And I think like all of that area is just happy as if it's left alone. And then you have the intrusion of the acoustic neuroma, and then potentially the intrusion of whatever treatment. And our effort is to just get that whole area back to happiness and balance.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And things taking up extra space. That's not something your skull really likes or that you have space for. So
Absolutely.
I'm wondering for your symptoms. I know for me, recovering from the surgery, it was like very gradual, right? With like things getting better. Did you feel like that was similar with radiation, where it was like slowly getting better over time? It wasn't like, and then boom, like light switch, it's different.
Absolutely. Which has probably been one of the greatest learning lessons for me with the acoustic neuroma journey because patience is not one of my natural strengths. And I've also been very surprised at how long it's taken to recover. It's like, I guess my biggest medical experience going into the acoustic neuroma was that I broke my arm when I was 8 years old. And it was a pretty straightforward process. And got the cast on, and then 6 week time frame. Sure enough, we were back to normal after 6 weeks. And the recovery from the acoustic neuroma was just absolutely not like that. And I think recovering from surgery was probably about 3 years, Emily, until I felt like I didn't think about the acoustic neuroma today. And and also it's like I was just able to do the day and kind of like back to a baseline. And there were like so many days and months and years in that time frame where I felt like I don't know if I'm ever gonna get back to like a baseline, of not having like this or that. Um, and then radiation, there was a similar test of my patients in the recovery, albeit shorter. It took about a year until I really started feeling better. And to your question, both situations very gradual until it was like again with the radiation, I kind of like look around and I'm like, I remember. I had a day, and I looked at the clock and it was 10 p.m. and I was still awake and I was still like interacting and like chatting and I couldn't believe it. I thought, oh my goodness, it's 10 p.m. I'm making progress.
Yes. Sometimes I feel like we almost need to keep a journal or something like that so that you can compare.
Yeah,
Because sometimes I
yeah,
think one of the hardest parts is feeling like you're not getting better, but you are. It's just so incremental that you're not seeing the improvement. And like I think about my yoga instructor will sometimes say like take photos of yourself in like a hard pose you're working on so you can see as you are like improving over time to encourage yourself. And I think about that sort of a thing in this process
Mhm.
because you can just be like, "Oh, I have a headache again," but you don't realize like, well, actually you made it like 2 more hours before you needed to take the Advil. And then the next time
Yeah,
it's 4 more hours, and that all adds up. But in the moment, it's like, oh, I just need to take Advil all the time.
right, right. Um, the formation of like an icicle, right? I don't know why that came to my mind. It's January. I don't know. Right? It's like a huge icicle is formed by like these tiny little drips that are like not noticeable. Yeah, I think like a very mentally healthy person could approach this with the journaling. It's like a very, very like good mental health practice to like really be able to see like definite progress or comparing like descriptions of feelings. That's a brilliant idea.
Yeah. I'm not gonna say that I did it, but I have recommended it for people who are in like a really tough spot, and
Yeah.
need that way of like seeing that things are getting better. So what
Yeah,
would you say
definitely.
were tools that you did use to help you? Like, what were some different things that were beneficial for you as you dealt with your diagnosis?
Let's see. Um, as I dealt with my diagnosis, like I said the first time, I feel like there was a little bit less like dealing with the diagnosis for me because I was so relieved that something indeed was wrong. And then there was little time of a diagnosis to treatment, which I think is unusual. Most people probably have an experience that's more in line with my second go with the acoustic neuroma, which is the diagnosis, and then back to the lucky comment. Lucky that it's slow growing, so there's nothing urgent that has to be done right away, which I think is a challenge in and of itself. And so I felt like it was the second time around that there was really more like dealing with it, like dealing with like I had really hoped and I had this like strongly in my mind when I had my 5-year check-in. I went back to the hospital in Utah where I'd had the initial surgery and thought like I am going to close this chapter. I'm going to move forward. And then life had a totally different plan for me. So there was a lot more like getting through kind of the re-diagnosis the second time around. And anyway, realizing and making peace that like this is not like a closed chapter and this is part of how things go. Um, I think a couple of things helped me through that season. Um, one, well, yeah, a couple of things. Because I knew I had time, um, the research, the opportunity to actually meet with different doctors presented itself. And that was really valuable to me because ultimately, when you decide on the type of treatment, I still feel like it's a little bit of like rolling the dice, because they all have risks. But if something must be done, something must be done. And so it helped me to go into it saying, like, I've done some research. I asked a few people. I've talked, it's like I've tried to I've tried and I've like done my best trying to pull together resources and then I made a decision and I moved forward and I felt like if there were adverse side effects with what I chose, I hoped that the research would bring me some peace and comfort in that, saying like I absolutely tried my best and life just unfolds in a complicated way. So that was helpful and powerful. And then also, something I did not do the first go around that I did the second was actually talk to people that had gone through the treatments that I was entertaining. And that was also really powerful because I feel like doctors have a very clinical viewpoint, and thank goodness for that. But also, there's more to it. And I feel like especially with the acoustic neuroma because it's intertwined with all those nerves and there's a lot of like emotion to it in addition to just like what's clinically happening. I felt like it was really powerful to just be able to talk with people about like what was it actually like, what was your experience like, and anyway, and then ultimately it's like when I was ready to make a decision, I did not feel ready to make a decision, but it was like I had the information that I had, and then just move forward in the best way possible.
Yeah.
So anyway, dealing with it very difficult, but grateful for resources.
Yes. Makes such a difference. And circling back to what you said about kind of coping with it more the second time around, I think a lot of us feel that if we have surgery and we have the tumor removed, then it's going to be over and it's going to give us closure. And I think a lot of us are looking for that. I remember thinking that I was more comfortable with surgery than radiation because I knew it was out. But because of the nature of this tumor, it really doesn't work that way. You can tell yourself that if it gives you comfort, and that's totally fine. I definitely told myself that. But you do have MRIs for 10 years after surgery typically. And so there is always that risk of regrowth. And I really would challenge people to, instead of thinking of it as black and white, of like, yes, I have a tumor, and no, I
Mhm.
don't. It's like, okay, you had this diagnosis. And so now this is a part of your life. And it's been a part of your life because typically it's been growing for a long time before you knew about
Yeah,
it.
good
That's
point.
very normal. And you had a good life, but before your symptoms started, and even though you were living with this brain tumor possibly a decade in many cases. And so to just remember that like it doesn't have to be black or white. Like really we're living in the gray. And what we need to do is manage the symptoms and manage the tumor in such a way that you can live your life fully and not get caught up in like, yes, I have a tumor, no, I don't. Um, and just be like, am I doing well? Am I healthy? Are things going in the right direction?
Well, it's so interesting you mentioned that because um, with, I mean, kind of still staying involved in the acoustic neuroma community has been just like a beautiful thing that you and I both share. And so I've loved the opportunities to just like learn new things and see how they're approaching it now. This year would be my 10-year anniversary from when I had my surgery. And medicine has advanced. And even within that period, I'm seeing that they're doing some things differently. And so one of the things that I've noticed, and again, like not being a medical professional in any way, but just kind of like noticing and seeing, um, it seems that some doctors are even considering and taking kind of like partial approaches where they say we're going to do like a partial removal, but strategically decide to leave this and this and this for you because we think your quality of life will be better, and then treat these with radiation or kind of have like a little bit more of a customized treatment. And I think that that speaks to exactly what you were saying, Emily, is kind of the being okay, knowing like this is a part of my life and we're going to approach this in a way that's going to give the best possible health outcome and not necessarily like pull the tooth, get it out of here, and then I can move on. Um, anyway, it's interesting. It is significantly more gray than black and white, and I probably wish it was more black and white. Most of us probably do.
Yeah, I absolutely do. That is exactly how my mind works. Like, I want it to be clear cut and easy. I want, like, when I went for that first doctor's appointment, I wanted a doctor to just tell me what to do. And the fact that, like, I had to figure
Exactly.
this out without a medical degree, it was mind-blowing to me. I had no idea that you could be given this gigantic decision tree to
Oh,
navigate for
absolutely.
your brain. But it just isn't. That isn't how it works. And I agree with what you're seeing. There's a lot more of that. And I think that the prioritization of quality of life is huge and really what it should be because these aren't cancerous tumors. They are typically slow growing. That's a very reasonable choice. And I think that the fact that it's moving that direction is really wonderful.
I totally agree. yeah, quality of life, right? Because I think that that's one of the biggest challenges of the acoustic neuroma because I don't know, because of its location and the nerves that are there. I don't know exactly why, but um, I think so much of it is like dealing with what has to be dealt with. And then in the post world, like how can we live our best lives, even with this maybe slight disadvantage? How can we still live our best lives?
Absolutely. So on that topic, do you have any stories to share about like unexpected things that have come to your life because of your diagnosis? Like, have you met wonderful new people or had new opportunities or just ended up somewhere you wouldn't have seen in your life before this all happened?
Absolutely. And it's interesting. I've heard I've heard it said, and probably in like better terms, but oftentimes our biggest challenges can end up being like some of our greatest assets. And I just think I grew up in a small town in Idaho where if you had a problem, you just like, put your boots on and just like went out and handled it. And um, I am so, so thankful that this experience has given me a significantly deeper level of empathy when I have been at so many places in my life where just like putting on my boots and going out there and handling it 100% did not work. Or I could not do that. And that was so humbling and insightful to see, oh, people around me have these moments and experience these things where um, it's not helpful or they can't just get it together and go take care of things. And we need each other and we benefit from each other because, oh my goodness, I had a friend who was a social worker in the oncology unit at one of the local hospitals here in LA. And at some point, she mentioned this to me, and it was so profound. And she said that amongst their team of social workers, when they have a meeting, they have kind of a phrase or a theme that is they are the temporarily well taking care of the temporarily unwell.
I love that.
And I'm grateful for the opportunity to have been in that category of the temporarily unwell because it helps me to be better when I'm well and being able to like reach people or see people when they are not. And being able to like go to people in a better way, having kind of understood what it's like to be in those difficult places.
That's beautiful. I love that so much. And I think that that's something that can't be explained. Like you can't just pick that up secondhand. That's something you really have to
Mhm.
experience to understand.
Oh, absolutely. One other thought that comes to mind along those lines, kind of when this adverse condition experience actually, I think, turned into like a benefit to me in my life. The single-sided deafness. That comes with like all kinds of interesting life challenges.
Yes.
Um, I I worried in my work and my profession, I spend a lot of time with people in group settings, which we all know is one of the most challenging circumstances for
Yes.
single-sided deafness. And I thought, how will I, and this, I have my first go around in college when I'm at the very beginning part of my career, and I'm like, this is devastating. How will I be able to manage these group settings? And there was a very wise friend who I was talking to about this circumstance, and he said, I bet that the single-sided deafness will actually end up being one of your greatest attributes because you have to listen so much more intently to be able to hear people. You have to be like lip read and pay attention to body language at like a very heightened level than someone who has two working ears. And so he said, that's just going to happen because it will have to happen for you to be able to like hang in there and communicate. And he suggested that the result could be people will feel more heard, people will feel more understood because there's a significant more amount of effort put into listening and hearing and seeing and understanding the person corresponding with. And it's wild, but years and years later, I've seen that unfold.
Wow.
And it's like who could have ever imagined that that would be a positive of like the struggle of loud restaurants that we all face, you know?
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I've heard that used before for parenting with hearing loss, is that like then you interact with your kids much more intentionally because you can't just like listen while you do things. You stop and listen. And kids really benefit
Uh-huh.
from that attention. And I was like, "Oh, that
Interesting.
makes sense," but I haven't heard it in that situation. But that's really cool. And I love that you shared that. That's a really great story. Well, Kim, it's been absolutely fabulous talking with you tonight. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Oh, such a pleasure. Truly. Thank you.